Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. And welcome to another podcast of Harvesting Wisdom. I'm your host, Mike McMahon. With me today is Hailey Aiken. I got it?
Hailey Aiken.
Hallie. No, not Holly. Is it Holly?
Hallie with an A.
Haley. No, I told you I'd screwed up.
It's all,
Hallie,
it's
okay.
all good.
Aiken. And you're with ASU's Sustainability School.
That's right.
So appreciate you being on the podcast today. It's a cool podcast. We are going to probably do a second segment with Maya. Is it Maya Dailey?
Maya Dailey.
And Maya Farms.
Yeah.
And I know I've intersected with her probably 10 years ago when I did agave farms, but she's got a good operation in South Phoenix, and now she's doing a collaboration with ASU. Right?
That's
so
right.
We'll save all that for later.
Great.
Let's talk about you right now, though. What? Tell me where you came from, what you do, and how do you get to the point where you're at right now?
Well, I'm a human geographer by training. And my interest in farming and agriculture and actually climate change adaptation was really through the climate angle. I actually got started in this area working in the international development field and recognizing that drought and climate impacts can have a real devastating effect on people who depend on farming for their livelihoods. So at that time, I was focused in the Southern Africa region, which is really vulnerable to drought, and got really interested in how do farmers make decisions when they're faced with so much climate uncertainty, and what can we do as scientists to kind of help with climate forecasting to help support farmers in those decisions.
So you just mentioned three different wild little intersections that I have. Where did you go to school? Where did you grow up? What part of the world?
I grew up in Indiana, so
Okay.
in the Midwest, going to farmers markets and eating, fall apples and that kind of thing. And then did my undergraduate degree at Brown University in environmental studies.
Okay.
Moved to Washington, D.C. after my undergrad and worked in international development with the World Bank. And then decided I really needed an advanced degree because I was getting in over my head, and moved out to Arizona to do a graduate degree in geography at the University of Arizona.
Interesting. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, not all too far, that Midwestern kind of area. It's New York, of course, but far away from the city, but have a degree in environmental design.
Okay.
And then I got on a Greyhound bus as soon as I could, and I came to Arizona, got a degree in urban farming, urban planning at ASU.
Oh, interesting.
So kind of interesting stuff.
Probably cross paths somewhere in there.
And our nonprofit, we are in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh.
So we are in Zimbabwe and Malawi and Zambia, and we are doing same thing. We're working with communities, trying to help them grow food. First, act as a community, so that we're not dictating what they do, that they're really part of it. So it's been really more of a learning curve for us how to work with it. But it's kind of the same stuff. We're doing climate smart stuff, which is really composting, mulching, and then picking the correct variety of plant that has some value, and all of those things, right? They don't over there, mostly smallholder farms, so they don't have necessarily the capital for a lot of sophisticated stuff, but they know how to do the boreholes and then simple irrigation stuff. So it's an interesting
Yeah, I had no idea.
Intersection that we're following here.
Yeah.
So okay, so now you're at the School of Sustainability, which in my day would have been called environmental design. I don't know. Now they call it the School of Sustainability, which, by the way, is probably a better word. But the problem with sustainability is it means everything. We use it, a lot of times Joe and I use it when we don't know what we're talking about. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, is that sustainable? Because what does that actually mean? So are you working to make an organization or a business sustainable? Are you working to make a community sustainable? Or are you trying to do sustainable practices in agriculture? I mean, what is the focus? And I know what's the focus for the school, first of all, and then what is the focus for you in particular?
Yeah.
Guessing it's something to do with agriculture.
Yeah. That's a really, it is really a difficult issue, actually. Like, really, what is sustainability? Our school is interdisciplinary, so we have
Same word they used for me 40
we have
years ago.
economists, we have natural resource specialists, we have geographers, we have psychology, we have ecologists, we have, and we take a kind of a systems perspective. So thinking about if we're going to try to improve our practices that sustain life on Earth, and not only sustain it, but actually enable thriving of planetary resources, we need to think about social, ecological, and technical interactions. And so we train our students in systems thinking. And personally, I take a view that sustainability is about decision making. It's about a process. It's, we have lots of different visions about what the ideal future is, but what we think of as sustainability is really thinking about how to weigh different criteria, justice issues, equity issues, environmental integrity concerns, and trying to see how we can manage and navigate very difficult trade-offs to try to ensure the best possible outcomes for all elements in the system.
It's funny, the language is pretty similar. I remember systems, we had, classes and we called it holistic planning, holistic system. Now you can listen to it's circular economy, the whole thing. But and there's a lot of authors that I'm hoping to finish podcasting with. One of them is in Africa, by the way, and hopefully he'll be on one of the podcasts. But it's the same thing with a lot of regenerative farming. Looking at, and so the thing So I got that degree, moved out here, started doing something completely different while I was going to college for grad school. And then I really didn't visit this space for a long time until I started the community garden, right? But if you'd asked me, but now it's crazy and this is kind of a cool thing for students in that class. There wasn't a job for sustainable person.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, you got to know you got to go for a grad student or whatever. But it's setting you up for a life of a different way, a different perspective to live your life, right? But and it kind of all came full circle for me once I started getting involved with the nonprofit world and in agriculture, and I started a soil company, organic soil company. So now it's come back. But if you had asked me 10, 15 years ago, well, what did you get out of environmental design? I would have said the only thing I really remember was unintended consequences, because we studied everything and everybody has a solution. And then there's unintended consequences. And that's what we suffer from in today's world.
Wicked problems.
Right. Problems that we created, but we didn't think we were creating, whether they were some kind of biomimicry or whatever it was. So you think you're doing the greatest thing on the planet, and then, I didn't really think through it all.
And that's where the systems perspective is so important.
Exactly,
and really trying to understand those feedbacks and dynamics that provide those unexpected, what we often think of as kind of nonlinear. It's not just an additive thing. We may cross a threshold. You know it in soils, I'm sure. Where you think things are fine, and then suddenly they're not.
There's so many variables, right? There's so many variables, internal and external variables that can really. And what the thing though is it's somewhat parallel. I would say it's almost diametrically opposed to the scientific method. Scientific method is about trying to break everything down into its pieces, chemistry or basic biology, right? And so we analyze one particular piece. And, a professor could work his entire life or her entire life on one little aspect of something.
Reductionist approaches.
Right.
Yeah.
Just not,
Yeah.
and not realizing that, wait, there's something else bigger going on that you missed. So it's
I
kind of
think
crazy.
we've made some real impressive advances in sustainability science by using science, but also incorporating
Right.
systems modeling, qualitative work as well, and integrating. I mean, some of my work, I've been very interested in how the way we think, our narratives, the stories that we tell are actually influential in how we do things, our practices, and they have implications in terms of the infrastructure we build.
Sure.
And so we need to go beyond just the material and really incorporate
Well,
things
what-
like mindsets and
There's
values.
another thing now is AI, and AI frightens the schools because it's threatening education as we know it. That's really the problem, right? And it's threatening artists. It's threatening, and so we see all the unions. They're all against. I'm sorry, the genie's out of the bottle, right? So
Yeah.
I think the question is how will you use it? And AI, what we're finding, because I use it in all my businesses, is that it's only as good as the practitioner. So if you think you're going to skip an education and just use AI, you're going to be, unfortunately fed a lot of misinformation, and you're not going to be able to prompt it. You're not going to be able to truly use it in whatever that profession is. But it does help, cover some things, but it can be also very frustrating using it, right? So interesting as that is. But so how did you you started, how did you get over to Africa, and how did you start getting, when you said you're into agriculture, that to me, that means you're into soil, maybe you're into seed.
I'm actually interested. I got into agriculture to understand farmers' decisions.
Okay.
So it's really the social side of it. And what I was interested in is how do people, when your life and your livelihood depends on the seed you put in the ground, how do you navigate the deep uncertainty of not knowing what the weather's going to be like by the time you harvest, what the market's going to be like, what prices are going to be like, and just all that risk. And so when we're trying to understand climate adaptation, which is my primary research focus, rather than agriculture, it's really just about how do we manage climate change and how we're going to adapt to it. Agriculture provides a really interesting window into it because it's all about, it's right in your, as having tried to farm, uncertainty is is what you breathe every day.
And it's the one thing you need in business, and we sell to big farmers. We sell our products, right? And they have a hard time making decisions, and understandably so, especially in today's market. So in today's market, back, I don't know, 50, before World War II or around World War II, a large part of our population was engaged in farming. Yeah. And through, I think, big ag at the time, when it wasn't conspiratorial, they just were building big machines, and they had chemists. We had the chemistry going on, and we thought we could fix everything with a simple cure. And in the meantime, everyone in every industry is looking to reduce labor, right? And to reduce hard labor. Right. We don't want to go back to the age of slavery or, swinging picks and shovels per se, right? But we've taken it to such an extreme that I think it's in industrial agriculture, there's 1% or 2% of our population engaged. And now we're 3 generations in, and our generation, even mine, and then the generations behind me, have no idea of how the earth works or anything, how it's working. And it's the same. So I'm looking at farmers, and looking at Peter's documentary is the same thing. It's, you can see, he parallels 5 sets of farms, right, with right next to each other, and one's doing the regenerative, and the other is doing what they've been doing for 100 years. And it's like when you're watching TV and you're watching, like, I don't know, a murder mystery, and you're like, he did it. You're like, come on, can't you see it? And it's, but they can't see it. And today, we know, for instance, alfalfa, the price is so low. We're seeing alfalfa farmers that are 4 generations going out of business,
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
that this was, I don't know, just some kind of a legacy that was ordained by God to work. And
Yeah.
it never was. Their grandfather struggled, or great-grandfather struggled probably with different situations. But now, first time ever, there's not enough water. It's
Yeah.
just as simple as well. And I just did a presentation a few days ago where I had to talk about this. I came into town in 1982, and there was 2.7 million. Today, there's 7.4 million here.
Yeah.
They're expecting by 2050, 12 million. So we've gotten to the carrying capacity. We're already there, but we're pushing past it where we just don't have it. What year did you come?
Well, I was here to do my graduate studies in Tucson in the
U of
mid
A?
in U of A in the 90s. But I came back here to join the School of Sustainability in 2008,
Okay.
right in the middle of the housing crisis.
So in the
yeah.
90s, you saw some of it too, but from Buckeye in Phoenix, from Buckeye all the way to Apache Junction was citrus groves, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
in schools here, you were taught the 5 C's.
Yeah, that's
right.
true. Yeah.
And I just did a talk about this. That's why it's in my head. But 5 C's were cattle, citrus, copper, cotton, and climate.
Yeah.
And if you think about them, copper, yes, because everything is run
Now
on
it's a
copper.
resurgence.
So it's
yeah.
70% of the world's copper comes from Arizona.
Yeah.
Climate, it's still bringing people, but
It's
when
a
is it going to?
problem. Yeah.
It might start biting
That's
us.
a nonlinear dynamic.
Right, because
there,
now
yeah.
it's like the climate is getting a little too
Yeah.
toasty, right?
Yeah.
It's for a chunk of the
Yeah.
year. But the other ones they're toast.
Yeah.
I mean, cattle, citrus, and cotton.
Yeah.
Cotton is at $3.92 a bushel. You got to sell it for $8 to make any money. We're seeing one gin after another completely collapse throughout the Southwest.
Yeah.
Alfalfa is pretty much shot. They're dropping the allowable amount of water from 8 acre feet down to 2 acre feet. You're
Yeah.
getting to the point when this has been part of the local breadbasket, right, for
Right.
the U.S. In the summer, in the wintertime, us and then maybe over to Florida, that's the only place you really can grow crops. So you talk about growing locally,
Yeah.
right, and eating locally. But we're in big urban areas, and now we have a huge urban area on the west.
Yeah.
Everybody came out here, but now we're at a point where we can't really grow our own food.
Yeah. Well,
So
not
how
in
does that
this-
work?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that I think a systems perspective allows us to kind of explore is also what is the scale at which we want to kind of pursue certain types of sustainable, kind of achieve a sustainable system. And so, like one of the things that when we think of resilience, for example, which is not quite the same as sustainability, but
It's part of
it's a
that
kind of
package,
a
though,
part
right?
of a part.
Yeah.
We want a system to be resilient, and parts of resiliency are diversity. It's also redundancy. So, one is we're talking about the industrial
To replicate,
phase.
right?
We have emphasized not only a kind of reductionist view, but also a very strong emphasis on efficiency. And efficiency means, you specialize in one supply chain. You go for a kind of monoculture. It's efficient. You can buy the right equipment. You can.
2 guys
but-
can run
Yeah.
1,000 acres.
But it also has a trade-off. And we saw that in COVID, where, potatoes that were grown for a particular supplier couldn't be diverted into another supply chain. Or, these kinds of things have shown that, yes, in so-called, stable times or good years, it works really well. But we're in a time of a lot of change and a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty. And it's showing those values of diversity and redundancy, modularity, these kinds of concepts that we have to kind of think about.
Sure.
And so it might mean that we can't, maybe not every parcel of farm should be, infinitely diverse,
Right.
but you want a mosaic. You want different types of farms. You want different types of supply chains in a system. You can't, maybe Phoenix won't be able to supply itself with food, but you want it to be in a region in which there's a diversity of
Sure.
So thinking about the scale at which you're trying to kind of think about these attributes, I think, is useful.
And it's funny, we're using kind of the same words, same jargon, right, to describe different levels of this circle.
Yeah.
So you mentioned during COVID how we saw that the supply chain kind of broke down. And if you really think about resiliency, we all survived, and we're still eating again, right? So we were resilient on the surface, but we could have seen how badly that could have gone south. We saw dairies like just spilling their milk out. Tons of the farmers we work with just plowed their crop in, and I'd be like, why don't you harvest it? Because they didn't have the logistics don't work. You don't go out and harvest something that can't be sold. And what I found interesting, I don't know if it's even half true or not, but I started kind of studying, and somewhere I read that 25% of Americans eat out at restaurants. So a lot of the farmers would only grow for specific restaurants or distributors who dealt with restaurants.
Right.
And so a big part of the problem, and that, by the way, was probably the better food.
Yeah.
Because the restaurants demanded a higher price and would pay a better price to get better quality, right? So, but I started to think, my God, 25% of, I still don't eat out that much. I don't even eat out that quite nearly that much.
Yeah.
But I remember as a kid, once a year we'd go to a restaurant on our birthday, and most of the time I was in trouble. So I didn't even go. So I don't know, restaurant eating, but now we're all eating out at restaurants.
Convenience,
But we also, restaurants are not there for our nutrition. They're there to make a profit and for things to taste good. More fat and more sugar, more salts and that kind of thing. So that's not really the most resilient way to feed a population either, although it's part of our economy.
Of the system.
It is.
Yeah, and I think that, the key thing is diversity. And within any system, you also want those actors and practices to be doing the best they can for both the society and for the ecosystems and natural resources. But the thing is, I think we've prioritized efficiency more than resilience.
Absolutely.
And that has a lot of costs. And it's hard to be diverse. I mean, it costs an individual business they can't necessarily keep up a variety of supply chains. They need to kind of figure out which is going to be their focus. Sure. So there's a cost at one scale, but at another scale, regionally, we need to have that full diversity. And that means investment in diverse types of farms. And
efficiency is part of business, right? We want to reduce labor, reduce costs, reduce equipment, and weird as it is, efficiency is almost a synonymous word to sustainability. Because if you're efficient, you're using less, you're creating less waste, you're using less input, so there's a part of, so these words are kind of crazy how they are, and I use it for soil. So we look at, you're talking about a systems diversity or a society's ability to eat a diversified palette or for farmers to grow. But when we're looking at soil, we need diversity
in
of
your
plants,
biological,
right? Your biological diversity. And we're seeing, especially in Africa, not just, we're seeing it here, but we went to seed banks in Africa as well, where probably a good, again, I'm reading, I'm throwing numbers out, and you can fact check me all you want, but I've heard as much as 30 or more % of our biodiversity is gone forever. We've had extinctions. We've always had extinctions. Anybody who's going to fight the whole climate change concept, but not at this accelerated pace. And that's what the issue is. And so when we're looking at things like resilience, and soil resilience has to do with having enough carbon in the soil. And if you don't have enough carbon, and in Arizona, these last 10, 15 years with, fighting for every dime a farmer can make, not having any help with the government or anything like that, they're going with less soil health, less carbon, and because of that, they're growing more and more synthetic fertilizer only. But there's a point in which that soil, it's just you can't grow
Denuded,
anything
yeah,
in it, even
yeah.
with your fertilizer. But the other problem is that soil's not healthy enough to be resilient.
Right.
So when you have an infestation or when you have any kind of disease, it's not you can't naturally fight it.
Yeah.
So it is funny how these terms are
Well, I think
interchangeable in a big systems look.
yeah,
right?
well, I think you highlighted a really interesting difference between perspectives of sustainability that are based on using resources more efficiently, which kind of extends the kind of lifespan of
Lifespan
a
and
system.
sustainability, right?
But then there's another perspective that I think I perhaps adhere to more, which is what you refer to as kind of investing in the functions of the soil, like how it retains its own vitality through its carbon sequestration capacity or through the microbes that are in there. And that's more of like a functional definition of sustainable, where you're really investing in what keeps the system going rather than just kind of using the resources more efficiently so we can kind of extend it as long as possible into the future. We need kind of a balance of both, but I think the
Absolutely.
function, kind of investing in system functions allow for that kind of more regenerative
Well, the fact that
perspective.
the way we're talking about it just exemplifies the need for a systems approach.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Because one thing means one thing and it means completely the opposite too if you're looking
Yeah.
at it a different way. But okay, so I can go on tangents and talk in the abstract, and right now I'm not sure if anybody knows what we are even talking about. But talk to me specifically. You're at ASU now. You've been there since 2008.
That's right.
So you're like a senior fellow.
I'm a senior
right?
professor. I teach food systems, but I also work primarily on climate adaptation. A lot of my research has taken place in Latin America. So I worked with farmers in Mexico, farmers of corn or maize, which
my
is the
favorite crop.
traditional and very culturally significant crop, as well as coffee farmers. I've done a considerable amount of work in coffee in Central America and southern Mexico. I teach students kind of just more kind of thinking about the global food system and how to think about different ways to approach sustainability. I try to give them, the whole food systems rather than just the farmer. So we go from everything from production, we talk about trade, we talk about globalization, we talk about consumption, we talk about issues of like the decline in seed biodiversity. And, one of the things that I like to emphasize with students is to understand sustainability as a choice, as a kind of a decision problem that we have to, as a society, we have to navigate. We need to understand what are the kinds of constraints on our decision making. So what are the structures, like the policies, the governance arrangements? How do those limit the choices that we have, and how can we change those? That's kind of at a broad macro level. We need to think about the resources, the technologies, the innovations, AI, precision agriculture, all these things that may improve efficiencies, or they may enhance the kind of functional abilities of our systems to sustain themselves. And then we need to think about values. So I really feel that, what type of decision we make and what kind of weight we put on different types of criteria as we make those decisions depend on our values. And so that's really important.
You're 100% right. And Joe and I, with urban farming, we're a part of the Climate Reality Project with Al Gore's project.
Okay.
And we have the Arizona branch of that, which you should join. By the
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
you're now a
yeah.
new recruit. That's why we're going to Mongolia, because of the World Summit
Okay,
that they're
great.
having over there. But when you're talking about going into Mexico, Latin America, do you physically do a lot of trips down there? Do you take students down there and do is it like real projects, or are you just kind of watching and what are you doing?
Well, I currently I'm working more in urban than rural areas, but the work that I had done in with farmers in Central America and in Mexico is what we call ethnographic research. So this is interviewing, talking to farmers, going out into the fields, helping them harvest, really trying to understand what is it like to be a farmer. And one of the things that I think is really valuable for me is that, it's very easy to sit in an office somewhere and say, people
Sure.
should be planting this. It's much
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah,
sustainable.
yeah.
But it's quite different to talk to somebody and ask them, why do you do what you do?
Well, you can't
And-
appropriate the culture because then there's no way
and
you're going to win,
we have
right?
no way of knowing really what are the constraints on their decisions. Why do they choose to do what they do? Things that seem illogical, like, one neighbor may be pursuing one strategy and the other isn't. And you could just make a judgment and say, oh, this person is, they haven't picked this up and they're not. But usually there's a very good reason why
Absolutely.
they're not doing
Sure.
it. And trying to understand, that's what's been fascinating for me, is really to try to put myself in the shoes of
Right.
what is it like? What are the policies that are restricting your choices? Or what are your priorities? You have children, they don't, or other things that constrain and make it really important for us if we're trying to improve the ability of farmers or anyone, consumers, to pursue a better choice, a more sustainable option. We really need to understand why people do what they do.
Sure, and the reality is they're out there on a day, just like most people here in the United States. We are, on a day-to-day basis, we don't have time to think of, global issues or whatever. When
No.
you got to put food
No.
on the table, you got to do work, right? But in Africa, I ask the questions too, like, why are you eating this maize? Maize is probably not even as edible. We wouldn't probably feed it to our animals here because it's really tough stuff. But
yeah.
they take it and they grind it up and they make, in each country they have another different word, sema. And why are you eating? And every time they invite me in for dinner, and a third of the plate is this porridge.
If you don't have it, you haven't eaten. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that's their thing,
Yeah.
and it's not good for your nutrition. It's not really. But it feeds your belly, and it's also not. It's not a giver to the soil. So because they're rain-fed agriculture only, they're literally, that's the only crop they can grow during that rain season, right? And it's the primary crop that everybody grows. And the last 3 years I've been over there, it's growing knee high and then it dies out. And their entire family spending time laboring to cut the rows and then they buy seed and then they plant this stuff. And it's not a seed that they can bank on their own. So they're buying the seed and then they think, well, this year we're going to make it work and we're going to pump nitrogen in. Well, nitrogen has the opposite effect when it isn't raining. It just helps burn that crop faster. So it is, it's interesting. And then I ask the question, though, and the answer is always, this is Africa. This is Africa. This is Africa. So that's why you grow maize. This is Africa.
Colonialism,
a
lot of history
Where does
there.
maize come from?
Yeah.
It's only been in Africa for less than 200 years. It's from Mexico. So
Yeah.
I understand it in Mexico, but I don't understand it in Africa.
I mean, I think that's what's so fascinating is to think about if when we want to transform or there's an interest in transforming a system from something that is perceived as either unhealthy or unsustainable, but digging deeper and realizing how deeply held certain values and worldviews are, and in this case, how they were formed by history. Colonial influence on what people could eat and what was efficient for colonial governments at the time, and how colonialism transformed the African landscape.
Sure.
And
we do a whole
yeah.
book because we're doing ecotourism there next year.
Interesting.
And so we've written a book on, about Africa because most Americans, they don't even go to Africa, right? So the idea is, first of all, they didn't really have domesticatable plants or animals. So because of that, they stayed nomadic longer. And they were tribal like all of us on the planet, right? We all come from a clan, then up to a tribe, and then a city-state. But they were tribal a little longer. And the next thing that happened in their history was slavery. And slavery took from the population. It didn't allow the population to naturally grow. After slavery came colonialism, and then you got that whole apartheid and really, it's like a new regrowth is only 30 years old. My God, how could you possibly expect anything from a civilization that's 30 years old. So it is an interesting concept, and so land was basically given to the people who probably deserved it to begin with, but they didn't have the capacity. First of all, they didn't have the capacity of capital, but they also didn't have the capacity of really the know-how of how to grow, buy, sell, work the equipment, and that kind of thing. So that's where kind of Africa is now. So I say all that to people to say, look, you would do no different. I mean, those are the obstacles they have to work through. And it's the same thing with the Climate Reality Project. You know, we've gone to several of these things now, and I'm like, hey, you know, this is all about awareness. Well, we got to go from awareness to action.
Yeah.
We can't be talking awareness. So there has to be a social factor involved. And the social factor, it's too late to talk to somebody my age. I'm already stubborn in my way, right? You have to start doing it at the child level. That's why our preschool to high school STEM program that we have for, which is garden-based, is, I think, one of the approaches, right? Because you have to have some kind of way of showing people a different perspective. So, were you a lover of Buckminster Fuller?
I haven't really been
No.
a deep fan. No,
In our,
yeah,
you know, from
yeah,
environmental
yeah.
science, then it's
That was
he's the
it.
guy, right?
Yeah,
So he has
yeah.
all the great quotes.
Yeah.
And one of his quotes, and I'm going to screw up the quote like I do names, right? But his concept was give a person a tool,
Right.
and they can learn.
Right.
You can't
Right.
teach anybody. There are no teachers. There's only
Right.
learners.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, in Africa, they don't call them students. They're called learners. And that's it. So you have to provide the tool and that perspective for people to do anything. And it's just as hard in the U.S. to convince people who have, it's 4 generations. We've got,
Yeah.
you know, they went to school. The schools have been set up to do what we're doing now. So it is really a difficult,
Yeah.
when you talk decision making, it's not an easy thing.
No, and I think one of the things that has been a kind of theme throughout my own career is just deep humility. I mean, I have such respect for the farmers that I have spoken with all around the world in many conditions of, you know, very difficult marginal economic situations. But you know, the idea that I don't think I could put seed in the ground and without any idea whether I would be able to get a harvest or not. And just think that is going to determine whether my kids
there's a
get to
level
the
of
school.
optimism.
I don't know if it's optimism or persistence, but I have learned so much from the farmers that I have worked with.
So are you optimistic about this whole
well,
thing?
I think what I have learned is that there is a lot of local knowledge. There's a lot of deep experience. People who have to live with risk on a day-to-day basis in fairly extreme environments, and are able to feed their families in some way. You know, they have learned a lot. They are very attentive to their environment. And while they face significant constraints, financial constraints, environmental constraints, historical injustices about access to resources and land, we have a lot to learn about how they manage uncertainty. And I'm inspired by a lot of organizations that are taking some of those successful strategies, successful meaning they have allowed people to be resilient under very extreme conditions, and seeing how we can make those into thriving pathways.
Yeah.
And I think that means understanding culture. It means understanding values and preferences of people and being respectful of those. And it also means really working at all levels with the policy, the structures, and then the practices, and then being attentive to how people talk about the things that are meaningful to them. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful about farming as a livelihood is that farmers that are practicing it, some of them don't have a choice. There's no alternative.
Well, they're in too much debt.
Well, or there's not a lot of alternative economic opportunities.
Yeah,
It's
that's
the
true,
land
too.
that's it. But many of them talk about it as a vocation, and you know that this is not an easy activity, and the things about farming, of being able to create life and nurture it in different contexts. Well, I don't want to romanticize it, but I think that idea that people are, many farmers that can have that vocational passion is something to cultivate. And we've lost a lot of that in our pursuit
when we went
of
industrial.
efficiencies.
When we went industrial. But interesting, because you're a human geographer, which is a first time I've heard that term, by the way, but a cool term. But
as opposed to non-human, I suppose.
It is interesting because if you think agriculture is our base industry, always was, always has been. My father used to always tell me, "Oh no, it's prostitution." I said, "Nope, it's food. You got to eat first." But that's the deal. Everybody has to eat, so somebody has to grow that food, distribute it, that kind of thing. What's interesting is another perspective, of course, is the waste in the process, in the system, which is upwards of 40%. I've never talked to a farmer who believes it's below 40%. They're like, "Hey, it's 40% on the farm."
In the U.S. system, it's definitely.
By the time, and think about how much really is wasted in our refrigerators at home. But and then the other thing. So this is why we talk. It's such a social thing, right? And our issue has to be socially addressed first. I think farmers took over from dentists. Dentists used to be the number one profession. If I'm not, and people are going to fact check me, they're the number one profession for suicide. But I believe farmers are now.
Oh.
But
well, I know in the 80s that was a big issue with the farm debt crisis and such.
Right, and I think they're still up there, and so that gives you an idea of the social impact. Right?
It's
and
a
the family
really
and
stressful, risky enterprise. That's sure.
But you are optimistic.
I am, and I think that among all the noise and all the problems, there has been more attention to food systems and looking at it not just as an agriculture thing, but as a food system, which means that consumers have a role to play. We need to express and be willing to support policies that really enable better, more regenerative practices in farms around the world. We need to be able to fight for more equitable policies that enhance participation in the farm economy, because there's a lot of people who might want to be farms. And we talk a lot about, our average age of a farmer is 60 something, but the new farms are often younger people, very idealistic, who really do want to get a foothold in this.
Going
and I
differently again.
There's a real opportunity there to connect people back to the planet, to see what kinds of activities we can do and pursue, and what kind of innovations, new, different types of agricultural products. And I think that's where, if we provide the right policy environment, which right now is a little tricky in terms of supporting those types of initiatives. Right. But I think they have an opportunity to really give us that diversity, show alternative pathways. And there I see in my students a lot of excitement. Food is something they can connect to.
Absolutely.
It's something everybody puts in their mouth. And I think that's like the really great entry point into sustainability.
Great. Well, we're going to continue this with Maya.
Wonderful.
Probably on her farm. That way we know she's got to be there.
That's great.
And we'll, because we didn't really get into it, which we shouldn't have today anyway.
No, we can talk with her about.
We'll talk about what you're specifically doing with your students over there.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
A lot of fun.
Okay,
Thanks, Ian.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.